All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of Form Check Friday. This series is where we take your videos that you've emailed to us using the website the email that's linked down in the description below, and I take and give you technique advice. We talk programming, we talk technique adjustments, we talk psychological advantage, and we do our best here to just take every submission that we can and help to make people better lifters. This is free coaching 101. So hopefully it is of value. We do this for the community. So if you enjoy it, leave a like, comment, subscribe, whatever. It is, it's for y'all. So hopefully you get something out of it, and hopefully you can see something that somebody else does that's similar to your lift or whatever. With all that being out of the way, let's dive in. So our first lifter here is Joseph. Now, Joseph is doing a deadlift, as many of y'all can probably tell. This is 170 kilos for a double. Joseph says his max is 180. He is not currently training for a competition, but one of the things he's noticed is he's got a discrepancy between his squat and his deadlift. He says he can squat 220, but his deadlift is only 180. That seems to be frustrating him, right? So he said the first thing to give out is his grip. So he's wondering if we have any technique advice for him, and we'll get a little bit into some of the squat versus deadlift discrepancy. Part of it, you just built a squat here, man. You've got longer torso, shorter femurs. You're just gonna be able to squat well, and deadlift is maybe gonna be a bit of a tougher lift to progress. We all have those sort of natural leverage advantages and disadvantages. So some degree of this discrepancy you may not be able to do anything about, but that is not to say that all hope is lost. So a couple things with your deadlift here. Number one, we got a pretty wide setup going on right now. We got a wide stance, we have a wide grip. The first thing I would investigate is potentially narrowing things up a little bit, right? If we narrow our stance up even just slightly, that's going to allow us to narrow our grip up slightly, which means we're going to be in a more upright torso position. We're going to be able to minimize the range of motion that we have to pull the bar through, even just slightly. And, when we're talking about setting new maxes and pushing, 2.5 or 5 kilos at a time, those centimeters of difference, they make a difference. The other thing that I think we might be doing a little bit of here is I think we might be prioritizing trying to be in a lot of extension, right? We can see here, even before you go down to setup, we're getting into this kind of position, right? And I think a lot of the times, again, this will come up a little bit later. We'll have a bit of a discussion about this with one of the other lifters, but a lot of people tend to think that if your back looks like this from the side, that's a good deadlift. And if your back looks like this from the side, that's a bad deadlift. I'm here to tell you that this is probably stronger at least 7 times out of 10, right? Some degree of rounding in the back, as long as we're not doing this, head here and hips here, that's going to be really awkward. As long as we're not like totally horseshoed back onto ourselves, is going to be a stronger position, right? A lot of the times when we're prioritizing this kind of like overextended brace, what's going to happen is the biggest limiting factor is going to be these spinal erectors here. If we get into a bit more of a neutral position from the side, we're going to be able to incorporate a lot more of the musculature of the back. We're going to be able to use the legs better and more efficiently. So I want you to play around with your brace, and instead of trying to be very extended, think about if this is your rib cage, right? Here's your spine and here's your pelvis. Think about just trying to pull. So let's say this is the front of you, right? Just try to pull those ribs down and pull the back down and create all that tension between rib cage and pelvis, right in here. Tighten this up, including pulling down on the front, which is maybe going to put you in a little bit of a flex position. Okay? Don't be afraid of a little bit of flexion. It's not going to be a bad thing for you. The other thing you mentioned specifically was your grip, right? So we want to fix your grip. Now, first, if the gym you're at doesn't allow chalk, that's going to make things a little bit tough. But There are liquid chalk alternatives that really don't make much of a mess, provided you allow the liquid chalk to dry before you use it. So maybe look into some liquid chalk and start training your grip, right? Start training your grip outside of deadlifting. And the biggest things I can recommend to do this are going to be setting yourself up on a really high block pull to where you are basically deadlifting from here, right? You're deadlifting like a very small amount. So there isn't as much deadlift, but there's going to be all of the same grip. So we grip the bar just like we would in deadlift, stand it up off the blocks, and we try to hold it for like 8 to 10 seconds. And we're trying to do this with 85% of our max, maybe a little bit more. And we're doing this for maybe 3 sets after we're done our deadlifts. That is going to help you progress your grip so that it's not trying to keep up with the rest of your pull, right? The other thing that's going to come along with being in a little bit more of a flexed or flexed, allowing a little bit more flexion is going to be your arms are going to be a little bit longer, right? Stop trying to crane your neck back. Keep your head in line. Choose to look down here, out here somewhere. That way we're not arching the head up. We're looking and keeping the head and the view in line with the trunk instead of, again, trying to do all this excessive extension stuff. Beyond that, like I think the mechanics of your deadlift are quite good, right? We're getting to a pretty good push off the floor. We've got a good amount of patience, but you can even see here on this rep, as we get to lockout, the grip's starting to go and we kind of do, let it down before we get fully locked out. So that grip stuff is going to be really valuable. Grip as many of your deadlifts as you can. Try not to rely on straps unless you absolutely have to, and the grip will come along. Okay. Yeah, I mean, the only other thing to investigate would be programming differences. But I think if your grip is a limiting factor, that's really going to hold your deadlift back. Anytime the grip goes, the deadlift is just going to feel like crap. We're not going to get force transfer to the bar if our grip is not great. So that's Joseph. And our next lifter here is Damian. And now Damian's doing some bench press here. This is 190 pounds. At around an 8.5 RPE. Damian is training for competition, wants to know how his bench is looking, feeling like maybe he cut the pauses a little bit short. The first thing I notice here is this, whatever this is on your hands here, paper towel or something. I don't understand it. I've seen people use like sponges and stuff like that before. I'm not sure what the intent or purpose is with that, right? Like, is that supposed to help grip the bar better? Is it making the bar thicker so it's a little easier on the wrists? I'm not sure. So the first thing I would recommend is ditch that, right? Especially if you're training for competition, because all the equipment is going to be standardized in a competition. You're going to have to lift on the competition bar, and that means adhering to competition specs. Now you can take a look in whatever rule book your federation has to see if the bar diameter is different or something like that. But honestly, I think, I don't know. I even train on a bar that's like probably 2 or 3 millimeters thicker than a comp bar semi-regularly, and I don't find it has any impact on anything. So that's thing number one. Thing number two, if we look at these wrist wraps, they're below your wrist. They're like just up here, right? They're not doing anything to actually support your wrist. So if you want your wrist wraps to actually help, they have to come up so they cover a bit of the back of your hand, right? That way, when your wrist goes back into them, there's something there to help support it, right? If they're down here, and we can just move our wrists freely, they're not really doing much. Now, the alternative is you just maybe don't need them, and that's fine as well. Now, let's get into the actual bench press. Okay, so I think from what I've been able to kind of pick up so far, things look mostly good. Unrack height, you're going for a little bit lower as opposed to a little bit higher, which I fully support. It allows you to maintain a pretty good back position out of the rack. Let's see. Descent is pretty good. We may be a little bit over tucked, right? And a lot of the times when people are trying to find and maintain back tightness, they tend to over tuck, when what we're looking for is that external rotation and that finding of tightness in the back and the shoulder blades, we don't necessarily need the elbows to follow quite as far, right? So one thing I would investigate is if you allow your elbow to flare out a little bit instead of being quite as tucked in, how does that feel, right? How does that impact your bench press? The other thing we're seeing throughout is shoulders are creeping up. We're allowing our chest to fall here rep to rep. I want you to maybe play around with your foot position, maybe put your feet out here a little bit more and try to get more force transfer from your feet into your trunk, right? We want to be using our leg drive to help drive the chest up and support the arch, to support our chest coming up to meet the bar. So we're not losing position rep to rep, right? I think on some of these reps, pauses are pretty good, and in other ones we are rushing it a little bit, right? Okay, I might be taking it back. These might all be too quick if we're training for competition. That last one was almost good, but you have to take into account the fact that as you come down, the initial touch, like the rule book, and again, I can only refer to the rule book I know, which is the IPF, sorry, is we're looking for that bar to be motionless, right? So if that bar touches and then continues to sink that little bit and then starts pressing before it spends like a quick half second motionless, then we are pausing too quick. The other thing we're seeing here is with this getting stuck like this, makes me think, yeah, having your elbows a little bit more flared out might allow you to even that out, as well as trying to work to maintain this upper back position so we're not seeing the shoulders come up, we're not seeing the chest fall as we go through the set, okay? Hopefully that helps, buddy. All right, and our next lifter here is Henry L, and he's doing a squat. All right, so like I said, Henry's doing some squatting here. Henry said this is 300 pounds, RP 9.9. Not training for a competition, wants to improve his squat technique. He said he's been told to widen his stance and to slow the descent, but it's hard to do. He says he feels like he doesn't have much jam if he does that, and is going to lose some weight off the bar if he does those things. So the other thing he mentioned is wondering how his back position and back rounding are for a max effort lift. 9.9, hey? I think we may be at a full 10 there. Honestly, this is a pretty decent squat. We get a whole boatload of depth, right? And again, if you're not training for competition, maybe that's your standard, right? And you want to be training to like the absolute basement. But if you're trying to add weight to the bar, going that low is going to make it tougher, right? So the reason people are likely suggesting you a little wider is because it's going to be harder to get this deep, right? Different people's hip morphology, like the way their bones and structures are created, are going to have sort of a natural amount of like people's hips are going to feel more natural and strong at different angles based on how they're built. Now, you might be somebody who is able to get a whole lot of depth and good sort of like free unresisted movement with your hips, kind of facing the femur forward. Whereas if you move your knees and hips and widen your stance a little bit, we might be feeling a little bit of restriction as we get to the bottom, which is going to give us some of that tightness, some of that rebound out of the bottom. So I do think that widening your stance could be a way to go. I don't think it's necessarily the way to go, but I think it's definitely worth investigating. Now, the number one thing that I think people mess up when it comes to like making these technique adjustments is they'll take, this weight, 300 pounds, which is their absolute max, and they'll do it in a wider stance and be like, well, that didn't, I failed that, right? Instead of being like, okay, a wide stance squat is, for all intents and purposes, a totally different movement. So we're going to treat it as such, and we're going to start at like 150 pounds and we're going to work on it. We're going to try to build that as a separate movement without the intent of like, okay, it's just immediately going to be better. A lot of times when you're making these technique adjustments, they take a while to work through. They take a while to perfect, and they take a while to like integrate some of those cues and some of the positive changes into your current squat, right? So if you were a power lifter, I would say we absolutely want to squat less deep, because in powerlifting, you don't get extra points for going extra deep. If you get to like here, you're probably at full depth, and you go like a foot below that. So when we go that deep, we do tend to see a disconnect. We need to get pretty loose to get that deep. And what I mean by that is we're relaxing a lot of the muscles, a lot of the tension that we have on the way down in order to create those joint angles. So when we come back up, we tend to run into these really hard sticking points like what we're seeing here, as the muscles try to like re-tighten and re-find all of that tension and bracing and power and position and all of that stuff, right? So when we go from loose to like, okay, we got to re-find everything, we run into these really hard sticking points. Now, I think if we can learn to create and hold more tension into the bottom, like, yeah, it's probably not going to feel better right away. It is probably going to be something that you're going to have to work on and fine tune. And I think a lot of the times, yeah, like I said, people expect technique changes to just like feel better immediately. And they don't always. Sometimes you have to train them up like a separate movement, but all of a sudden you're getting stuck at 400 instead of 300, right? So the other thing you asked about was how's your back cave? And I don't actually think you lose that much back position. I think generally speaking, your back looks pretty good, especially for how low we dunk it. When we hit the bottom like that, again, you can see this bar kind of pop forwards on you a little bit. And that's what is also causing part of this sticking point, is that we're losing a lot of this upper back tightness. So probably another thing I would recommend is this back position here actually looks quite good. But if we notice, when you pick it up, a lot of this, right? A lot of like shrugging and shoulders forward. So then by the time we get out into the rack position here, we're now kind of up in like this, instead of being more open, longer collarbones, right? And more engaged in the upper back. I think that's likely a symptom of your grip width. And I would probably look at playing around with a wider grip, maybe a lower bar position on the back. But again, these aren't necessarily going to be things that feel immediately and immaculately better. These are going to be things that like, okay, you have to take the time to learn and acquire them as a new skill. So yeah, that would be my recommendation, right? A lot of this stuff isn't necessarily easy. It requires us to backtrack and to rethink things and to, make these changes and then learn new components of our technique. So yeah, that would be my recommendation, is probably look at adapting some of those things that you've been told. I think probably people gave you good advice to widen up, control the bottom position a little bit better. I think that's probably the way to building a bigger squat in the long run, but it's maybe not going to feel better right away. Okay. All right. So if you're watching along here and you're thinking, oh man, that guy has a really great shirt. This is one of our new Calgary Barbell shirts that we have for sale at calgarybarbell.shop. It's very cool. It's a great fitting long sleeve, as I'm sure you can tell. And you can check it out. Should be a link in the description, calgarybarbell.shop. Also, if you're watching this and you're thinking, dang, I wish I had some advice like this on my lifts specifically. Not only can you, yes, submit to Form Check Friday, but also you can check out the Calgary Barbell app. We have a training app. In it, myself and the other phenomenal coaches at Calgary Barbell do exactly this. We go through our Discord, where our lifters on the app submit videos of their lifts, and we offer critiques, and we have a conversation, and we answer questions. We offer advice, and we help people make jumps and learn RPE and understand how to modify their training based on injuries or equipment restrictions, all of these kinds of things. And again, you can check that out at calgarybarbell.com. The app has 50 something programs in it. The Discord community is absolutely phenomenal. We have a couple of really, really experienced people in there, as well as myself. And like I said, the other coaches doing form checks every week. So check that out. Without any further ado, let's get to lifter number 4, Nancy. All right, so Nancy here is doing some deadlifts. She is training for a meet. This is 225 pounds, 102.5 kilos for 5. And she said her max is 135. So this is 102.5 for 5, and her max is 135. Now, she says she struggles with the deadlift, specifically off the floor. She's been told she needs to be more upright, but finds that she loses power if she gets more upright. So let's take a look here. I actually think Nancy's deadlift is quite good to start with here. I think we're seeing a decent bit of change from technique on rep 1 throughout the rest of the set, however. So I think there's something there we can work on. Let's see, one more rep. All right. So, Nancy, first off, your rep number 1 is a great rep, right? I understand maybe people telling you should be more upright, but I don't necessarily think that's the way I would approach it, right? Like, this first rep is awesome. The first thing I'm seeing here, though, is as we come up through the lift, we're trying to do this like shrug up with the shoulders, almost like we're trying to pull with the shoulders, pull with the arms more than we need to. I want you to think about linking your shoulders in through your trunk, and that's it, right? It's a static tightness, it's a static contraction. Incorporate those shoulder blades into your brace and just do all the rest of it with your lower body, right? Push with your quads. Once you get to the top, lock out with your hips and hamstrings, right? So right there, yeah, we can see it in the way that the shirt kind of like wrinkles as we come through here, right? Right as we come through here, we're really trying to like shrug up and back, as opposed, and the shoulders end up kind of doing this like roll thing, as opposed to just keeping the shoulders down here, getting the hips all the way through and ending up with this good lockout. Now, when we go to rep 2, we go to pull in, and we don't quite get that same tension here, right? We're leaving the shoulders a little more forwards, which means, you know, hips are a little bit higher. We got a little bit more back extension to get through at lockout. So we do that same kind of like shoulder roll, and we maybe don't quite get as locked out. We don't get as good a hip extension. Rep number 3, we really leave the shoulders forward, right? So what I'm trying to tell you to do is lock these shoulder blades down, and we can see it on this first rep again, right? So first rep, boom, we find this like great tightness here, right there. That's where we're looking to feel it, is right there. This is at 20 seconds. Rep 2 is at 27 or so, right? Right? See the difference in the back angle? So it's just creating more tension and tightness here is giving you a better brace, versus here where we're allowing a little bit more rounding. We're leaving those shoulders further forward instead of tucking them in. And then we're maybe a little shy on lockout. Then we start to kind of rush the reps a little more, right? So in this one, we don't pull as far in terms of our position here. And again, we really leave those shoulders forward. So the biggest thing that we want to try to do here, and the reason I'm going rep to rep here, is because I want to make this point. We need to find more consistency from rep to rep. We need to make more of your reps look like that first rep. Not only did that first rep have the best back position, but the first rep had the best lat and shoulder blade position, and it had the best lockout. As we get further through this set, our lockouts get more and more like a little bit questionable, right? Shoulders are kind of left up and forwards here. We're definitely not seeing the same amount of extension as we did on rep 1, right? Locking out here, settling in. Everything looks really good. Hips are fully extended. Boom. Rep 2, we're a little bit forward of that. Rep 3, a little bit forward. Rep 4, we're quite a bit forward. And rep 5, again, quite a bit forward. So in those later reps, we're finishing more on the toes, right? We're ending with those shoulders further forwards. So pull the shoulders down and back into your back pockets when you're setting up. Take the extra time to find all of that good tension before you start the lift, and try to keep that consistent throughout your set, right? Keeping that consistency is the biggest thing. Now, I want to check something here, right? If I outline your hips and your knees, and we look at rep 2, and we look at rep 3, okay, we're quite a bit more forwards there, right? And this one, it looks like we're trying to sit down more than anything else. And again, there, trying to sit kind of down more. So yeah, think about kind of reaching your butt towards the wall behind you as you pull in, and let's get this position on every rep. And I think you'll find a decent bit more success. Hope that helps. All right. And our next lifter is Lucas K. Let's go. Lucas, this is some deadlifts. 160 for 5 at 10. Not training for a meet. He said some really nice stuff. Said Calgary Barbell got him into powerlifting, or powerlifting style training anyways. He's been following for a long time. Hit this set at the end of a block where he intended fully to go to a 10 RP, and had a trainer at the local gym approach him about how his back should not be rounding at all, and that's, I don't know, dangerous or whatever. And he wanted my feedback. He thought this would be an interesting discussion point to talk about, whether or not back rounding is an issue, how much is an issue. And he also mentioned, interestingly, he is, I think he's about my age, like 30, mid 30, late 30s. He said that he's had zero back pain or issues at all from deadlifting. And in fact, the low back pain that he had prior to getting into doing more deadlifts has gone away. So I think that in and of itself speaks a lot to the benefits of doing deadlifts. And, the reason that I think most people should probably do some sort of hinging, doesn't have to be powerlifting style deadlifts, doesn't have to be to a 10 RP, but training your back is going to protect your back. It just is that easy. But let's take a look at the deadlift technique now. I think the biggest thing I see here is that we're just quite high hipped. And I think if we were to, try to optimize this technique, which is what we're trying to do here, I would think about widening your stance and grip up a little bit so you can get a little more pulled into the bar. And I think especially as the set wears on, we end up pulling with higher and higher hips. And I think that's a pretty common thing when we're going to like a pretty high RP, right? We end up with higher and higher hips. We end up doing more and more of a, stiff-legged deadlift, right? So we're doing less and less with the quads, more and more with the hips, hamstrings, and back. Now, obviously, you got pretty strong hips, hamstring, and back. And I would also say what's interesting is looking through this, I really don't think there's that much back rounding at all, right? Like I think for the most part, like even here, like that's a pretty reasonable back position. I don't think we're getting like super rounded out. We're not having to go through a boatload of back extension to get to lockout, right? We're not getting to this point and seeing like a huge sort of like dumped pelvis and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I think in general, the deadlift technique here is quite good. I think, even starting from this first rep, I would try to work on getting those hips down more and not just down and forwards like you're trying to push them in here, but like down and back a little bit. Just try to get that torso angle slightly more upright. And sometimes widening things up allows you to do that a little bit better. So I think that's what I'd look at there. I do think that, I absolutely think that in most cases, having a bit more of a rounded back in deadlifts, right? Like we talked about earlier, I think generally, if this is your back in a deadlift versus this being your back in a deadlift, or even this being your back in a deadlift, I think those second two are going to be stronger, probably more consistent, more trainable, likely less symptomatic when it comes to back pain. That's anecdotal. Sure, you can come at me with that, but I got a hell of a lot of anecdotal experience in, 13 or whatever years of coaching powerlifters, from all the way from people who like don't know how to move when they start to world champions and stuff. So, Yeah, I've worked with a lot of people who start deadlifting like this, complain of back issues. We get them deadlifting like this. They no longer have back issues, right? It's more about finding an individuality. Oh, wow. There's a lot of different words trying to come out at once. An individuality within the technique, right? It's not that, having any back extension is bad and will blow you up, but it's also not that having any amount of flexion is bad and will blow you up. It's more like some people's backs are a little more tolerant to an extended position versus a flex position and vice versa. And figuring out which of them you are if you're running into back issues is a helpful thing. We have one more special little thing that we introduced last week that I want to continue to do here, and that is the good lift of the week. All right, so this is Sam L. Sam's doing a triple, I believe, here with 315 on the squat. Not training for a meet, called this an RPE 9. And he said his squat has been plateaued at 365 for a long time, noticing and wondering if maybe his knees are a little too far out. He said he'd like some tips on form on his technique. And, Dylan and I both watched this, and Dylan was like, yeah, I think this is the good lift of the week. I don't think there's a whole lot he's doing with his technique that needs to change. And I tend to agree, right? I don't think that your knees are too far out at all. I think if anything, maybe we're coming slightly too far forwards in the bottom, and, widening the stance up a little bit might allow us to just maintain a little more straight up and down as opposed to seeing this kind of scoop forward in the bottom. But that's very, very minor. I think probably the way we address this plateau is looking at programming, right? Looking at the frequency, the intensity, and the volume with which you're squatting on a week-to-week basis, as well as looking at the plan over multiple weeks. Is there a planned progression? Are there ups and downs? And, maybe like a planned deload here and there? Do you have a well thought out and intelligent plan? And I'm not saying that you don't because you're plateaued. I have lifters who plateau, and I like to think I'm a pretty intelligent programmer, but I think that if you don't have any kind of plan in place, that's really low hanging fruit, really easy to just go to calgarybarbell.com, get the free 16-week program that is free. Nothing attached. Get the program, go ahead and run it, and bada bing, bada boom. That is one way to do it. You can also, go to like Lifting Vault and pick one of any hundreds of powerlifting programs on there or whatever, right? Reach out to a local coach or somebody you trust, have a friend who's stronger, do some programming for you. I think a lot of people poo-poo on that idea, but I don't know. That's how a lot of people get started, is, just doing a little bit of programming for their friends. And then they realize, oh, hey, I kind of got a knack for this. And then they start, they go to university and get educated. And that's how some people end up programming for powerlifting. I don't think it's a bad idea, but I digress. I think your squat in general looks phenomenal here, Sam. I think you really have some really solid mechanics. You're doing a great job keeping your back tight. Walkout is super efficient. Like two-step walkout, that is, yeah, that's very efficient. Back tightness, brace, bottom position, everything's looking just solid. So keep doing what you're doing and just look into programming, right? Even if you, so let's say you're doing your own programming, just add like a couple sets a week and chances are you're going to start seeing things go up. Sometimes it's just that easy, right? Anyways, that, my fine feathered friends, is going to be a very spooky Halloween episode of Form Check Friday. So I hope everybody's doing good out there, staying safe, making gains. If you like the video, leave a like, and whatever else people do on Instagram. What social media are on? YouTube. Anyways, I'm tired. Bye, everybody.